The Battle of the Burning Mill was the first battle of the Dance of the Dragons, though it involved neither dragons nor even Targaryens. The death of Prince Lucerys upon his dragon Caraxes was answered through vengeance with the infamous incident known as Blood and Cheese. The Blacks and Greens had each murdered a child of the other side, quickly taking their family feud to full-scale civil war. Full dragon-scale civil war. And beyond the dragons, Fire and Blood tells us,
"And all across the realm, lords called their banners, and armies began to march."
Fittingly, the first to take up arms against one another were the two houses in Westeros most associated with feuding and vengeance, House Bracken and House Blackwood. The feud between two halves of the royal house was the perfect excuse for those two to go at it again, and they did so quickly. It's like they couldn't wait. This resulted in several tales of heroism, a huge pile of bodies, and of course, as the name tells us, a burned mill. We have in our podcast library a lengthy deep dive available on the entire history of the infinite Blackwood-Bracken enmity, but this video is a brief one dedicated to the first battle of the Dance of the Dragons, the Battle of the Burning Mill. Hello and welcome to another History of Westeros lore video. House of the Dragon has a much increased budget, but even with one of the larger TV budgets ever, there is no way for them to include every battle in the dance. There are a lot. They couldn't possibly include every scene, let alone every battle, and battles are crazy expensive. So we're here to detail some of the missing parts of Fire and Blood. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And also check out historyofwesteros.com. Harren the Black was the first king that Aegon the Conqueror took down to win his throne, and when he marched on Harrenhal for the confrontation, many of the Riverlords deserted their king for the guy with the gigantic dragon. Good call on their parts, as the place was soon a smoking ruin, though still functional enough as a castle when it cooled off months later. 1,200 more months later, aka a century after that, the realm's first great council was held, which we saw in the very first scene of House of the Dragon, at Harrenhal, as it was in the books. What we didn't see in the show is that Bracken and Blackwood, as usual, took opposite sides in the voting at the Great Council, because of course they did. When the dance broke out, it happened again, because if they were on the same side, then how could they fight each other? Gotta think. Prince Daemon Targaryen told the Black Council and Queen Rhaenyra on the eve of war that Harrenhal was the place he would strike first, as it was a central location from which to rally the loyal houses in the region, and large enough to actually host them all. He recognized that Harrenhal had both great strategic value and great symbolic power. Why not return to the place where Aegon won the Riverlands to win it again? Many would see it the same way, and remember what happened to those who defied him. With initiative and the obvious yet unspoken threat of Caraxes, the Bloodworm, he meant to win as many of the Riverlords to his side as possible, and with their help, they could overwhelm the rest soon afterwards. Fittingly, Daemon landed on Kingspire Tower, the place where King Harren burned to death. And no castle in Westeros is a grander testament to the folly of thinking a castle makes one safe against a dragon. Heck, the place wasn't even safe against regular fire, given the deaths of Sir Harwin and Lord Lionel 10 years prior, though, to be fair, that particular incident was quite suspicious. But it's a tale for another time. Lord Lionel's brother, Sir Simon Strong, the elderly Castellan, survived that incident and was unwilling to let the place taste any sort of flame again, dragon or regular. So Harrenhal submitted without a fight to Prince Daemon. When Sir Simon was young, he may have had living relatives who actually saw Balerion's grand stone melting display. So for many reasons, it's hard to blame him, and he may have preferred the Blacks anyway, perhaps believing Lord Larys responsible for the fire, as many did. The surrender yielded further success for Prince Daemon.
When Prince Daemon sent forth his call to arms, they rose up all along the rivers, knights and men-at-arms and humble peasants who yet remembered the realm's delight. So beloved of her father, and the way she smiled and charmed them, as she made her progress through the Riverlands in her youth. Hundreds and then thousands buckled on their sword belts and donned their mail, or grabbed a pitchfork or a hoe and a crude wooden shield, and began to make their way to Harrenhal to fight for Viserys' little girl. The lords of the Trident, having more to lose, were not so quick to move, but soon enough they too began to throw their lots in with the queen.
The sources tell us that the houses to raise their banners to Queen Rhaenyra and ride for Harrenhal were Frey, Mooton, Piper, Root, Derry, Mallister, and Vance of Wayfarer's Rest. The Blackwoods raised the banner of Queen Rhaenyra as well, but did not ride for Harrenhal. Instead, they rode straight for Bracken territory. Remember what I said about they just were waiting for an excuse? Yeah. They sacked villages, burned crops, drove off herds of livestock to their own lands, and despoiled septs. We suspect they sent a raven to Prince Daemon, however, to tell him of their plans, given what happened next. House Bracken's response was predictable. No stranger to war with the Blackwoods, Sir Aemys Bracken sent the command to muster at Stone Hedge so as to march on them in turn, and quickly. With the motivation of a Blackwood attack, it probably didn't take very long. No one is more hated in Bracken lands than the Blackwoods, of course, and they had a fresh outrage to get fired up about. They wouldn't be the only thing that got fired up. Sir Aemys had gathered a strong army, and the march to Blackwood territory from Stone Hedge is a short enough trek, but he perhaps underestimated his foes. Anger can make a man stupid, and these Brackens do hate these Blackwoods. One night, the Bracken army camped by a riverside mill, and the Blackwood army struck them unawares. The river in question is very likely the Red Fork, which divides much of Bracken and Blackwood territory, but we're not sure entirely. There's other smaller rivers and tributaries, some that don't even show up on the map. Either way, it's very likely the Brackens camped on their side of this river, which would partly explain how they got caught unawares by the ambush that came. The Blackwoods, of course, knew the Brackens would be coming and laid a trap. We're not really sure how Sir Aemys didn't see this coming. Could it be that he didn't send out scouts or post sentries in his camp? Perhaps rage made him blind, or perhaps he did send out scouts and posted watch, but the Blackwoods were just too sneaky. Perhaps the famous Red Rob Rivers, called the Bowman of Raventry and considered the finest archer in Westeros, picked them all off. Perhaps this generation of Blackwoods had a skin changer in their midst. It's not very likely, but it's certainly possible, and such a man or woman would be very helpful in scouting the enemy or scouting the enemy's scouts. Perhaps it was this very same famous Red Rob Rivers, called the Bowman of Raventry and considered the finest archer. Oh yeah, you've heard that part already. Anyway, regardless of why the ambush was successful, we're told that
men fought and died for hours, bathed in the red light of the flames.
The flames came from, of course, the very same burning mill that the battle is named for. We're not given a cause for the fire, and it may have been a simple accident, but it may be that the mill was set ablaze by the Blackwoods to distract the Bracken camp just before their surprise attack. What a spectacle that must have been. A spinning wheel of fire while a battle is happening, but there's no time to enjoy it, again, given the battle and all the fighting and killing and deeply held hatred and all that. All we know for sure is that the mill burned while the battle blazed. The first battle of the Dance of the Dragons was very well lit, thanks to that burning mill, and this epic display of fire happened despite the lack of dragons. Hey, the Dance of the Dragons first battle, and it didn't even have dragons. It would have been a tale worth telling for those who survived, but the casualty count was high, leaving fewer candidates to tell the tale. The battle lasted for hours, it says, which means the element of surprise alone was not enough to win the day for the ambushers. Lord Samwell Blackwood and his men clearly devised a cunning plan, but if Sir Aemys Bracken was incompetent in leading his men before the battle, he proved at least somewhat worthy during it, because they lasted quite a while and gave good account. Sir Aemys and his men made a capable stand, fighting off the Blackwood attackers well enough that the battle hung in the balance for quite a while. Eventually, the two leaders found each other and came to blows in single combat. Perhaps it was the chaos of the struggle that brought them together by chance, but we suspect at some point Lord Blackwood decided to go straight for Sir Aemys Bracken, though it might have been the reverse, Sir Aemys coming for him. Maybe they just went for each other. I mean, it's Bracken and Blackwood. Bracken would have reason to be confident, however, because it wasn't the first time these two had crossed swords. Almost 2 decades prior to the Battle of the Burning Mill, a much younger Samwell Blackwood, not yet Lord of Raventry Hall at the time, and the very same Sir Aemys Bracken fought a duel to win the favor and perhaps hand in marriage of none other than Princess Rhaenyra herself when she visited the Trident in the year 112. Sir Aemys, as I said, won the duel that day long ago, not to mention the acclaim of all Brackens and the tears of all Blackwoods, which must have been sweet for him. But he didn't get the princess, which must have been sour for him. Rhaenyra hadn't agreed to marry the winner and was unmoved despite the contest, which was not a fight to the death, as you can see, because here we have a rematch. But the Battle of the Burning Mill was just that. The dead lay all around them. The second chance did not pay off. Amidst the chaos and darkness and fire, Sir Aemys slew Lord Samwell, no doubt with many of their retainers and loyal men around them watching, and at least one woman. Lord Samwell's sister, Black Aly Blackwood, who hadn't yet been born when he lost that first duel, saw her brother fall and acted quickly, drawing her bow on Sir Aemys. He likely didn't see her. He was distracted not just by the battle, but by his own success. I mean, he had just achieved eternal glory. What better victory is there for a Bracken than to kill a Blackwood? And no greater Blackwood than the actual Lord of Raventree Hall. Sir Amos must have felt absolute elation, but then he felt nothing at all. Because whatever Black Aly was feeling in the moment, it did not affect her aim, which was legendary. She fired a werewood arrow right through the slit in Sir Amos's helm and deep into his skull. He was probably dead before he hit the ground. She must have known that acting earlier might have saved her brother's life, but maybe she just didn't have a clean shot before. Or maybe it would be dishonorable to shoot Sir Amos while he was in single combat with her brother. Or perhaps she was overconfident that her brother would win. Probably not a good idea if true, but again, these Blackwoods really hate these Brackens, and judgment can be clouded. Either way, she earned about as much acclaim as Sir Amos had by killing her lord brother, and unlike Sir Amos, she lived to tell about it. I bet Black Aly Blackwood never paid for her own drinks again in Blackwood lands. I mean, what a shot, what a kill, and it's a Bracken. But before she could cash in on her newfound fame, the battle raged a bit longer. It didn't just end right there. The element of surprise and the fall of Sir Amos had given the Blackwoods an edge, and though they took many losses against a foe honed on countless generations of hate, their advantage began to manifest. Sir Raylan Rivers, the half-brother of Sir Amos, took command after his fall, but he was unable to change the eventual outcome, which saw the Bracken army in flight with the Blackwoods in pursuit and a huge mess of corpses left behind on both sides. Though the Blackwoods won, yeah, their losses were massive too. Earlier, we suggested the possibility, if not likelihood, that Lord Blackwood communicated his plan of attack on the Brackens to Prince Daemon. Let's return to that. And it's not suggested in the text, so let's briefly explain what we mean. By attacking the Brackens with raiders, the Blackwoods knew the Brackens would gather their forces to give answer, as they no doubt had done many times before, just as the Blackwoods have answered Bracken depredations many times over the past as well. The feud has restarted over very small provocations, and this was a large one. They despoiled septs, after all, and it was a completely unprovoked attack. The point here is that the Blackwoods knew the Brackens would respond. We also pointed out that Sir Amos brought a strong force, meaning a lot of men, and that he may have also underestimated his foe. While the Battle of Burning Mill raged west of Stonehenge, all those earlier mentioned riverlords who gathered at Harrenhal struck the undefended Bracken castle from the east. All those Derrys, Roots, Pipers, Freys, Vances, and Mootons, etc. were led by Prince Daemon on Caraxes in a storming of the castle. There's no detail given here other than that they stormed the castle, and we suspect that's because it was so one-sided. There's not much to describe. With so few defenders on hand, the castle fell quickly. The Bloodworm's role may have been minimal enough, other than terrifying the defenders, who must have had very little hope, if any. In fact, they were probably glad to surrender. Lord Humphrey Bracken, along with his family and household, were made captives in their own ancestral seat. Presumably he's the one who surrendered since he's in charge. It was probably only a matter of days later at most when Sir Raylan Rivers arrived, leading the survivors from the west. It may have been only one day later. And he would not have failed to notice that King Aegon II's banner was missing from Stonehenge, with Queen Rhaenyra's banner in its place. It might have been confusing at first. Did he think perhaps Lord Humphrey had decided to switch sides after their loss so quickly? Or perhaps he and his men simply just saw Caraxes sitting there and needed no further explanation, like, oh, I guess we lost. Either way, he surrendered given the hopelessness of the situation. And Lord Humphrey had already surrendered, so his own lord had surrendered. What else is there to do? Lord Humphrey would also learn soon after, with sorrow, that his son Sir Amos fell during the fighting, but he would have also gotten the silver lining that his son died bravely and killed the Lord Blackwood before his own fall, which, again, that puts him in Bracken Valhalla. No Blackwood could actually stand before Sir Amos. It took a cowardly arrow, Lord Bracken might say, but words would be about all he had. To do anything other than bend the knee would mean his head or death by fire, and that would be Prince Daemon's choice, and it's not hard to see why he chose life instead. The fall of Stonehenge was enough to end all support for the Greens and the Riverlands, for the time being anyway. Raventree Hall's reaction would likely have been somber. A great victory, but at the cost of their lord. Yeah. But Benjicott Blackwood, later known as Bloody Ben, took his father's seat, ascending at the age of only 11. Dragonstone was soon informed as well. Prince Daemon's plan had worked. The Riverlands was theirs. The Red Keep was informed as well. King Aegon II had been assured their claim to the throne would go off with few problems, and that if there was going to be violence, the Greens would have the upper hand. Yet Harrenhal, Stonehenge, had fallen already thanks to the Battle of the Burning Mill, and with it all of the Riverlands. And what had the Greens won? If he had asked, well, he might have been met with silence, stammering, Not to mention, his son had just been murdered within his own castle. He'd either been lied to, or his counsel had seriously erred in judgment, perhaps to the point of incompetence. Or both. His elation at being crowned had been replaced by dread. The Iron Throne gave him a sense of absolute power, but that had gone up in flames like the unnamed mill, leaving him seized with paranoia. In this state of mind, he began to make changes to his council and showed an increasing desire to personally join the war on his dragon Sunfire, despite the risk to his own person. Battle of the Burning Mill didn't just begin the war in the Riverlands and in Westeros, it began the war within the Green Council. King Aegon II needed an outlet for his rage and frustration, and that had grave implications for the rest of the Dance of the Dragons. Don't forget to check out our immersive deep dive into the Blackwood-Bracken conflict, link in the description. Along with all our House of the Dragon and House Targaryen coverage, we've been doing this since 2012. Until next time, Valar Reread Us.